Hello and welcome to episode 44 of Not Reserving Judgment, a podcast about the latest intrigues, triumphs, and outrages in Canadian constitutional law. I'm Josh DeHaas, counsel with the Canadian Constitution Foundation.
I'm Christine Van Geyn, the CCF's litigation director.
And I'm Joanna Barron, executive director of the CCF. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about the case of a family suing a Catholic hospital in Vancouver because they transferred their daughter to a hospice instead of performing MAID on site.
I'll walk you through a new law that appears to be aimed at preventing oil development companies from advertising their environmental claims.
And we'll share our bad legal takes of the week, where we take a lighthearted look at some legal opinions that didn't quite land. But before that, I'm going to tell you about the controversy over the newly appointed commissioner of the Canadian Human Rights Commission. As listeners know, because we won't shut up about it, Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, would restore the Canadian Human Rights Commission's ability to level fines, in this case up to $50,000, and hand out compensation of up to $20,000 to people, sometimes anonymous, whose feelings have been hurt by allegedly discriminatory speech online. And I think this is a terrible idea that, it's a terrible idea to allow government appointed officials to police speech this way, because nobody agrees what's hateful or discriminatory. There might be good reasons to say some of the things that people consider offensive or hateful. And allowing the government to censor speech this way is precisely the reason we have free expression, because governments will always censor speech in ways that, support their point of view and not that of those who oppose them. And we know the potential harms of this because last time the Human Rights Commission had this kind of power, they hauled journalists accused of Islamophobia or homophobia before the commission. And even though those journalists won their cases, they still had huge legal bills and sleepless nights. And it was a good idea to get rid of this commission. So I don't know, or this power. So I don't know why we're bringing it back. But anyway, this week we learned who is going to be overseeing this beefed up wrongthink regulator if Bill C-63 passes. His name is Birju Datani, who formerly went by the name Mujahid Datani. And I've never heard of this person before or spoken to him, so I have no idea why he changed his name. But it's interesting that if you Google Mujahid, it translates from Arabic to someone who engages in jihad. And to be clear, I'm not trying to imply anything untoward, so please do not report me to the Canadian Human Rights Commission.
Jihad is a spiritual
discriminatory
pursuit.
Yeah, I'm just making a joke here. We have no idea, but I mean, it does have a very bad connotation in sort of general North American circles post 9/11, and yeah, I'm not implying anything here. Just trying to make a joke.
Mm-hmm.
The real problem here is, and this was reported by Marie Wolf of the Globe and Mail, Datani has some really bad old tweets. And these are not tweets he actually wrote, to be clear, but they're tweets where he posted links to stories with very offensive headlines. And I emphasize old tweets because it's 2024, and if you don't have at least some dumb tweets from 2014, were you even living? But these are really bad tweets. So one compared Israelis to Nazis, which is profoundly offensive considering that modern Israel is the country created as a safe haven for Jews after 2 out of 3 European Jews were killed by Nazis in the Holocaust. And Israel's treatment of Arabs is in many ways basically the opposite of how Nazis treated Jews. Jews were sent to concentration camps, whereas Arabs in Israel are full citizens. They're members of the Knesset. They're on the Israeli Supreme Court, and they do face some restrictions, but in general, they're fully fledged citizens who are treated with human rights. And the Israelis are the ones who have been, repeatedly attacked since literally day one of Israel's existence. So it's pretty offensive. The other questionable tweet was a link to an article that said, quote, "Palestinians are Warsaw Ghetto prisoners of today." Again, deeply offensive because the Warsaw Ghetto prisoners were, purposefully starved by the Nazis and then sent to death camps. And there were about 500,000 Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, and an estimated 300,000 were, gassed or shot or otherwise killed in concentration camps, and an estimated 92,000 died of starvation. So you can see how deeply offensive this is. Now, it's really important to note that Datani told the Globe, quote, I didn't say and have never said that Israelis are Nazis or Israeli policies are analogous or comparable to Nazi Germany. That I've always found offensive. And he's basically saying, yes, he shared the articles, but he didn't mean to endorse the views. He's just, sharing these articles. And I'm somewhat skeptical about that, but this is what he says. The Globe also reported that Tatani shared a platform in England with a member of an Islamist fundamentalist organization, which is opposed to the existence of Israel. And this is a banned group in Britain. But he told the Globe again, like, he doesn't share their views, he just shared a stage with them. And I don't like accusing people of guilt by association. People should be able to discuss things and debate controversial ideas. That said, he was involved in Israeli Apartheid Week too, and that tends to attract a lot of anti-Semites. It's not inherently anti-Semitic to oppose Israeli policies, but you do have to ask why people spend so much time and energy attacking the only Jewish state on the planet when nearly every other country has a worse human rights record. And Michael Geist wrote about this. He's an Ottawa law professor. He's Jewish, and he wrote that Datani's, quote, record of posts and appearances call into question the ability for Jewish or Zionist Canadians to get a fair, impartial hearing at the commission. And I think that's a fair comment, although honestly, I don't know that anyone can get fair hearings at human rights commissions because they do tend to attract people with some pretty extreme views. Datani, or rather Geist, is calling for Datani's job to be revoked, and Varani's office hasn't done that so far, which is really interesting, and I think a lot more interesting than the fact that they don't seem to have Googled this guy or vetted him all that much. Varani's spokesperson said, quote, it's critical for the Chief Commissioner of the Canadian Human Rights Commission to maintain the confidence of all Canadians and to be seen as impartial and fair, and to be seen as unimpartial and fair judge of matters before them. We have become aware of potentially troubling statements attributed to Mr. Datani as well as events he participated in while he was a graduate student in London, England, a decade ago. Mr. Datani did not disclose information about these statements and events during the appointments process. We have been carefully reviewing these statements and events and discussing them with Mr. Datani as well as relevant stakeholders to ensure that we have complete and accurate information. And, Varani maybe hasn't made a decision on whether to fire Datani or not, but it's interesting that he didn't immediately commit to firing him, considering the nature of the tweets. Christine, what do you think about this?
So I think that this is just what a lot of people have been saying for a long time, which is this whole attitude of this DEI, everything around DEI, where the vision or the worldview that you have, if you're involved in this sort of ideology and philosophy, is all about oppressor and oppressed, and that it's actually a feature, not a bug, that DEI is hostile to Jews. Jews are perceived by people through this lens who have this worldview as somehow powerful and able to control all kinds of things. So it doesn't matter that, over 1,000, nearly 2,000 people were murdered by Hamas on October 7th, that innocent babies were murdered and killed. They're still viewed through this oppressor lens as somehow responsible for their own death. And I'm not saying that that's what this man is saying, but that's the worldview of why people are still condemned Israel on October 8th. It's because that's the philosophy that they have. So it's no shock to me that people who kind of come from that ecosystem are actively hostile to Jewish people. So I'm not surprised at all by any of these comments that this person made. And now I'm not saying he said all those things that I just said. It's just that they're all coming from the same ecosystem. Joanna, what do you think?
Well, I would say, first of all, this is what I would call his denunciation and saying, no, I was just retweeting. I wasn't endorsing those statements, especially given what we know about his participation and his activism. This is what we would call a very low truth value statement. He has virtually every possible incentive to just deny this. And it's kind of like, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. So I agree with Michael Geist that And you can just imagine if any of these statements were made about gay people or Black people, again, it's the double standard. Like, I don't think there would be this lengthy, we need to think about this and investigate. Like, the person's appointment would just be revoked. And then the last thing I'll mention, Christine and I were at this really excellent interfaith Alliance Against Anti-Semitism event at the, sorry, my
Yeah.
Okay, the last thing I'll say is Christine and I were at this Interfaith Alliance Against Anti-Semitism event at a church in Toronto on Monday night. And they discussed what I had forgotten, which was Natan Sharansky's 3Ds of anti-Semitism. And this is how to
Oh yeah, that was great.
Yeah, when criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, which all criticism of Israel is certainly not, but these are the three hallmarks. First, delegitimization, constantly calling the mere existence of the state of Israel, which is a liberal democratic state, the only one in the Middle East, I'd add. So it's never just to critique the policy, but to say Israel has no right to exist. Second, demonization. So painting Zionists as like the scourge of all the world's problems. And then third, double standards. And it certainly sounds like something like Israeli Apartheid Week, as you pointed out, Josh, seems to truck in all three of these Ds. So I would say these comments are anti-Semitic, and more than the sort of reasonable apprehension of bias has been raised. And I agree with you. The most interesting part is that Varani is chewing over this and thinking through his options. That's it.
All right, so maybe that's enough about that. Christine, let's hear your news headline.
So my news headline is about a bill called Bill C-59 and greenwashing. So this has received a little bit of attention, but I thought I'd explain what's going on. So on June 20th, the federal government passed amendments to the Competition Act, which is what is like antitrust legislation, and this was aimed. It also includes false. So the Competition Act also deals with what we would call like false advertising claims. So this legislation, the changes were dealing with what's called greenwashing. And greenwashing is basically when a company pretends that it's environmentally friendly as a marketing tactic. For example, they make unsubstantiated claims about the environmental benefits of a product or a business. And so these greenwashing changes were included in Bill C-59, which is actually omnibus legislation that implemented a whole bunch of amendments by the federal government's fall economic statement that came out in November of 2023. So these greenwashing amendments actually create a huge amount of risk, liability, and problems for a number of Canadian businesses. And I think a lot of businesses are very concerned about these changes. So basically, what the greenwashing changes do is they prohibit representations to the public for the purposes of directly or indirectly promoting the supply or use of a product or any business interest. And I'll kind of summarize what the changes do. I'm not going to read the legislation, but basically there's is called a product benefit provision, which prohibits the statements, warranties, or guarantees of a product's benefits that are not based on adequate or proper testing, and the proof of that testing lies with the person or company making the representation. And then this other provision is called the business activity provision, and it prohibits claims about the benefits of a business or business activity that are not based on adequate and proper substantiation in accordance with internationally recognized methodology. Again, the proof of which lies with the person or company making those claims. And the penalties are really high if you are engaged in greenwashing. They are severe. They include an administrative monetary penalty that's either the greater of $10 million Canadian or 15 million for repeat conduct. If you do this again, it's 15 million, or 3 times the value of the benefit derived from the deceptive conduct, or if that can't be determined, 3% of gross worldwide revenues. So as you can imagine, businesses are freaking out. This is enormous liability on the basis of some pretty unclear rules. The amendments create, as I said, substantial uncertainty, risk, and potential liability. So in the past, when dealing with false advertising claims, the onus has actually been on the Competition Bureau to prove that claims are misleading. But under the new greenwashing provisions, companies now bear the onus of proving that the representation is not misleading, either by showing that they're based on adequate and proper testing or by showing they've been properly substantiated. And this placing of the onus on the companies to prove that their claims or goals or achievements regarding whatever their environmental goal is, whether it's carbon neutrality, emissions, or emission intensity, now they bear that burden of showing that it's not misleading. And there's this new undefined standard requiring businesses to base their claims on adequate or proper substantiation in accordance with internationally recognized methodology. And there's no specific meaning to that. There's no clear meaning to that. And it creates a huge amount of uncertainty to businesses about what it might mean, combined with enormous financial liability. So what are businesses doing in response to this? Well, as I said, some of them are freaking out. And I'll give you an example. The Pathways Alliance group, which is a group of oil sands companies, they have removed all content from their platforms, while other companies have modified their websites and social media in anticipation of these rules. And the the chief executives of the 6 oil sands behind Pathways, they actually put out a statement that said that this greenwashing law represents a serious threat to freedom of communication. So there are some freedom of expression issues with it, but I'd also like to point out that there also could be negative environmental impacts. So if companies can't actually market their environmental initiatives, because doing so would create all of these testing and proof burdens on them tied to enormous financial liability, they may actually abandon the initiatives because they can't brag about them. They can't even talk about doing them. And companies are financially incentivized, right? If they can't actually advertise the fact that they're doing something with an environmental benefit, they may stop doing those things for environmental benefits. So this could undermine the actual environmental goals that the government has in bringing this legislation into effect. So once again, we're kind of seeing this paternalistic approach of the Trudeau government is having, I think, entirely foreseeable unintended consequences, just because they always use this really top-down, meddlesome approach to all kinds of things. So, Josh, what's your take on the new greenwashing laws?
I think you make a really good point when you say this could actually be worse for the environment, because if you look at what Pathways has been doing, they are basically pushing this idea of, yes, oil sands contribute to climate change and we want to do something about that. And what we're going to do is carbon capture and storage. And there's like a huge carbon capture and storage proposal in Alberta that would like just pump the carbon underground, and it would be extremely expensive, but I think the oil companies have decided it's worth doing that to try and do what we can to reduce emissions, even though Canada's emissions are just a drop in the bucket of global emissions, and the real problems are generally overseas. So yeah, it's dangerous to the environment. And I just think of, this is sort of rooted in that idea Charlie Angus and the sort of far left, like Naomi Klein types have, that we need to make oil advertising like smoking advertising and put all these restrictions on it. And that's a free speech issue. And this is like, it's not, first of all, it's not anything like smoking. Like, we all use oil, and most people would prefer to have cleaner methods, but they're not available right now necessarily. And so, that's sort of just where we are on that. I also worry about this sort of spreading to other industries, because if you think of something like vaping, like there's lots of research out there that suggests vaping is far, far, far less likely to be harmful than like smoking cigarettes. But you have all these people trying to like push these anti-vaping laws, and it's like, well, you might do more harm than good if there's a certain number of people who are going to smoke no matter what. If you could get them onto vaping, that might improve health for everyone. So the government just needs to stay out of this stuff. Like it really is a big freedom of expression issue. People are not stupid. Like, if governments are selling them a product that is harmful for them, people generally can figure that out on their own. So, yeah, I really hate this, and I think it should probably be repealed if I were in charge. Joanna, what are your thoughts?
I think it's just a very stupid way of legislating. It sounds like they did not consult with industry, and it's kind of going at things in a roundabout way. Like, I think this might be controversial, but I think government can and does regulate certain environmental standards of industry, but going at the back end of how they communicate it and using a phraseology like internationally recognized methods, like it's such a vague standard. And as Christine pointed out, companies are rational economic actors, so you can assume that they will just seek to avoid liability. And the last thing, I thought you were going to mention this, Josh. This was in the running for our bad legal takes of the week, but I'm going to put this here. Max Fawcett, who's a journalist, tweeted about this. All the oil and gas industry has to do is put up, when it comes to its supposed net zero aspirations, invest the money, reduce the emissions. Instead, it's choosing to shut up. That's a giant tell. Terrible take.
It's a tell that they don't want to be fined $15 million for trying.
It's a tell that they're confused about what is being asked of them and how they can comply. It's not a tell that they're lying. So
And they were about to invest this huge amount in carbon capture and storage, right? Like that is putting up, they're literally like you're literally pumping carbon into the ground, and you're going to spend billions and billions and billions to pump carbon into the ground, and that's not good enough for the, environmentalists. Like anyway, I think that's putting up. Joanna, let's move on to your headline.
Well, let's take a break first, and then we
Oh,
come
right.
back. We'll move on.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is an interesting lawsuit out of BC, and it's interesting because it looks like it's strategic litigation that is seeking to carve out a new horizon in MAID, medically assisted dying. So this is a lawsuit that is filed by Gay O'Neill, the mother of the late Samantha O'Neill, who is a 34-year-old woman, was a 34-year-old woman who was diagnosed and passed away from terminal cervical cancer. And so the O'Neills are suing Providence Healthcare, which is runs several faith-based hospitals in BC. And they're alleging that Samantha was denied the chance to have a medically assisted death in her hospital room. So they're suing the province, health officials, and they're alleging that the Catholic hospital, which bans the practice of MAID, violated Samantha's constitutional rights. So this has been filed in the BC Supreme Court, and here's a bit about what happened. It is a very sad story, of course. So in April of 2024, Samantha requested medically assisted death in her room at St. Paul's Hospital, which is a Catholic hospital that prohibits MAID in its hospitals and long-term care homes. So instead of granting her the medically assisted death in her room at St. Paul's, she was instead transferred by ambulance to St. John's Hospice, which is a palliative care home also run by Providence Healthcare Society. There's some evidence that this trip was really painful. Samantha was sedated and she was writhing in pain. She needed a further injection of pain relief. Because she was sedated, she didn't regain consciousness for the ambulance trip. And so she was unable to say goodbye to her family. And the claim says that the circumstances surrounding the forced transfer and Ms. O'Neill's access to MAID caused and exacerbated her egregious physical and psychological suffering and denied her a dignified death. And so in general, BC's MAID policy requires health authorities to avoid transferring patients. But if the hospital is run by a faith-based organization, it is exempt from these rules. And Providence Health has already updated its policy, recognizing that this was obviously a horrible and traumatic experience for Samantha and her family. So what they have arranged as a compromise is that they have had Vancouver Coastal Health, which is another sort of health organization that administers hospitals and hospice homes. So Vancouver Coastal Health has built a purpose-built clinical space right next to St. Paul's Hospital so that a patient requesting MAID can get the MAID without being transferred by ambulance, without being put in a vehicle. I think it's like next door, or might even be like down a hallway in the hospital. The O'Neills say that this is not good enough, that this still doesn't solve the problem of having to move an ill patient from a hospital room to another facility. And they also critique the fact that this is only being built, this dedicated space is only being built at one of several of Providence Health's health facilities. So essentially the question is, given that MAID is obviously legal, it's policy, it's a procedure that you can request anywhere in Canada, can religious hospitals come up with this accommodation, or do they have to do it themselves? And it's important to note that were this to be found to be a violation of Samantha's constitutional rights, it would really be new territory in terms of the compromise that so far different provinces have struck between, on the one hand, the conscience rights and the religious freedom of physicians, as well as of religiously run organizations, and of course the rights of patients. So one case that sort of shows how this compromise can work that I went back and looked at yesterday is a case from 2018 called Christian Medical and Dental Society versus the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. And there, the Ontario policy of effective referral, which is not necessarily a direct referral, but facilitating that a patient who requests MAID does get in contact with a healthcare provider that is willing to provide MAID. So if you yourself have an objective to providing MAID, which many religious physicians do because they see it as killing, similar to their views on abortion, you yourself don't have to administer it. But you do have to recognize that the patient is vulnerable and you need to make sure that they get the resources to get that care. And that case went up to the Ontario Court of Appeal, which found that the religious physicians' religious rights, they didn't decide this on conscience grounds, because it turned out all the physicians in the case did profess a religious belief that they claimed prevented them from administering MAID, their religious freedom was violated, but it was saved by Section 1. It was saved under the Limitations Clause, and it was a fair compromise between the rights of patients and rights of physicians. Here, the claim is obviously much stronger. They're not just saying, they're saying not only in this case, St. Paul's not only provided the referral, but they physically took the patient to a facility where they knew that she was going to be administered MAID. And this case, which of course Dying with Dignity, which is a pro-euthanasia, pro-MAID group, has intervened in, and we understand that this is a strategic case for them, which may go all the way to the Supreme Court. They're saying that's still not good enough. You have to perform MAID yourself if you are a hospital that receives public funds. So interesting case, obviously heartbreaking case. I tend to think, I understand that yes, there are competing rights, and I tend to think that pushing this far is getting the balance wrong, particularly given the seriousness of the moral convictions and the religious claims. I know this is a very dicey area. We've been talking about this a little bit internally. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, when you say it's a stronger claim, you mean it's a stronger claim in terms of the hospital's religious rights, right? Because of all the accommodations they've already made.
It's a stronger claim in terms of the hospital's obligations, right? Because if in CPSO and Christian Medical and Dental Association, the question was, is it too much of a breach of religious rights? Because from the perspective of a religious person, if you're making an effective referral, you're still participating in the causal chain that leads to the medically death.
Okay, I thought for a second you meant it's a stronger claim for the applicants, like the
No, I mean,
family.
it's like it's making a stronger burden, significantly stronger. And if we know that in 2018 the ONCA said, okay, this is a fair balance, now we're really ratcheting up the extent of the obligation and saying you need to do it in your hospital. Even moving the patient down the hallway or next door is too much of a burden on the patient. So that's just,
Yeah, if you go that far, you there's essentially no religious right at all, right? Like the hospital has no right here, and it's completely been subsumed under, the liberty rights of the patient who's requesting MAID. So I'm not even sure that the effective referral thing is the right balance. Like there is an argument to be made that if you're a doctor, your duty is to first do no harm, and if your view is that MAID is harmful because it's not healthcare and it's actually the opposite of healthcare because it's facilitating death, I don't even know if you should be required to necessarily refer, but it is an interesting compromise, right? And it's one of those situations where courts have come up with a way to balance the two rights. And here, like you say, it seems to be trying to go even further than that and making the
much further. So in the
yeah.
ONCA decision, which I was looking at, they talk about how effective referral says that a physician can assign the task to another person. They can make the referral. They can make the referral to a non-objecting physician. Like they make it very clear that like you can do whatever you want to distance yourself from it. And groups like Canadian Physicians for Life at this hearing were saying their proposal instead was there should be some type of hotline that people can call. Like there's different ways that would be less intrusive, which I'm sure there are. This is just a morass. What do you think, Christine?
I think that effective referral was the compromise, and they're still not satisfied. The activist people who want to push MAID, they're still not satisfied with effective referral. And I think we're one step away from the next piece of litigation, which is going to require any physician to engage and participate in MAID directly. So I have a big problem with this case, and it will be interesting to see where it goes.
Okay, should we move on to bad legal takes of the week? Josh,
Sure.
what's your BLT?
All right, so my BLT goes to Shalene Drakestall, who's a freelance opinion writer for the Toronto Star. And the thesis of her latest column is that while some of the restrictions during COVID might have gone too far, people continue to, quote, fret about our lack of freedom, posting that Canada has devolved from democracy to communist dictatorship, and they don't realize what it actually looks like to not be free and how free we really are. And she appears to say, although it's kind of unclear, that if anyone is challenging freedom in Canada, it's people who buy into the ideology of our, quote, neighbors to the south. She doesn't really say what she means, but I think she means MAGA Republicans or something like that. Anyway, Drakestall goes on to list a bunch of examples of enslavement that are really bad as evidence of why we have it really good in Canada right now and should stop complaining about our lack of freedom. For example, she mentions Africans in the Democratic Republic of the Congo who are mining cobalt for electric vehicles as lacking freedom. She points to the Palestinians, who she says are not free because they face more security checks and sometimes limits on where they can go in Israel. And, those limits are imposed because people sometimes blow up buses and nightclubs and commit terror attacks. And I wonder if it ever occurred to her that these rules are required to keep Israelis free from terrorism. Then she gives us the example of slaves in Texas who were not freed until 1865. And, I agree. Slavery is a good example of a lack of freedom, and slavery does continue to exist in many countries, including among the Houthis, the Yemeni tribe that also supports the destruction of Israel. But I'd also like to point out that the slavery example she gives from the US is from 1865, which is nearly 160 years ago. She adds, Canadians for their most part are just inconvenienced and annoyed. Canada has its problems, but being free isn't one. And obviously, we're much freer in Canada in 2024 than most people on Earth ever were throughout history and continue to be in most countries. But that doesn't mean there aren't threats to our freedom. For example, our freedom of expression is under serious threat from Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, and also from Bill C-59, which is the budget bill that implemented that greenwashing bill we just talked about. And I just don't think we can brush off threats to freedom when people recently had their bank accounts frozen because they protested the government of the day, or where people were forced to take novel vaccines just to participate in society, and were told even if they had a reaction to the first one that they still had to get another dose of vaccine. So yes, Canada is one of the freest countries on earth, and I love Canada, it's great. But the past 5 years or so have been pretty bad for freedom, and we shouldn't pretend everything is fine. So that's my BLT. Christine, give us yours.
So my BLT is, once again, I've done a couple of these. This one's about a police, I guess, operational decision. It's a photo that someone named Faisal Cuddy posted. His handle is Faisal Cuddy. He also goes by the Muslim lawyer. So it's a photo of Toronto Police Chief Myron Demkew, and he's standing with a man in a t-shirt that says F Hamas, but it's not, doesn't say F, it says something else, but it
The
uses...
whole word I wouldn't let you use.
So it has like a maple leaf and a Star of David instead of the vowels in the F word. So it says F Hamas, and the chief of police is standing with this man. And Faisal Cuddy said, here is a photo of Toronto Police Chief Myron Demkew. Hey, Toronto Police, Olivia Chow, do you think this is appropriate for a police chief? And then he CC'd CBC, Global News, Toronto Star, Globe Mail, and CTV. And yes, I think it's great to stand with someone in a t-shirt saying F Hamas, a designated terror organization. In fact, I question why you think it's bad that the chief of police doesn't like Hamas or wants to have his photo taken with someone who condemns Hamas. Do you not condemn Hamas? Like, what exactly is the problem with this photo? To use the language of Trump, I would say it's a perfect picture. It's amazing. It's the best. So I love it. I don't see the problem. In fact, can you explain what the problem is exactly? That's it. That's my bad legal take. Goes to Faisal for thinking saying F Hamas is somehow a problem. Joanna?
Okay, mine will be really quick. My bad legal take of the week goes to the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, which has awarded $35,000 in damages to an Indigenous transgender woman who was refused a leg wax, allegedly a leg wax, although there's some mixed facts about whether it was a leg wax or there was some discussion of a Brazilian wax. This is in Windsor 6 years ago. And look, as I say, the facts are all sort of hearsay. There's some back and forth about who brought up a Brazilian wax and who brought up the issue of genitalia. The salon owner claims that he didn't have a staff member who provided nail waxing services. But in any event, given that the new Canadian Human Rights Tribunal fines against individuals engaging in online hate speech are $20,000, $35,000 against a small business, a waxing salon is almost certain to bankrupt such a business. So it seems disproportionate, heavy-handed, and driven by zeitgeisty identity politics, which never result in good legal decisions. So it's a bad legal take.
All right, that's it. That's the show. As usual, we hope you'll rate us, review us, and subscribe because it really helps us reach new listeners. You can support our work by subscribing to the CCF's YouTube channel, by following us on X, or by visiting our website, theccf.ca, where you can sign up for our new and improved Freedom Update newsletter from our colleague Russ. The CCF is a nonpartisan legal charity funded by your donations, so please click that donate button on our website if you can. Thanks for listening.
Okay, guys.